Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's Facebook Live chat discussion on sexual assault crimes in observation of National Crime Victims' Rights Week. My name is Courtney Cochran, and I am a social worker in the Criminal Division's Victim Services Unit of the Delaware Department of Justice, and I will be the moderator for today's chat. In today's chat, we'll discuss what sexual assault is and provide resources and tips for survivors of sexual assault crimes. Please know that if you are a victim of sexual assault, you are not alone, and help is available. Call the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 800-656-HOPE. If you have any questions during the chat, please submit them in the comments below and we'll be sure to answer them. Let's get started. Today, we have two panelists. Colleen Durkin, Deputy Attorney General in the Special Victims Unit at the Delaware Department of Justice, and Lisa Rapko, social worker in the Special Victims Unit at the Delaware Department of Justice. The first question I have is, what is sexual assault?
So sexual assault is, in a very broad sense, contact that is sexual in nature or sexual intercourse that occurs without consent of the victim or where a victim cannot give consent. So sexual contact includes touching of anus, breasts, buttocks, or genitalia without consent. And then sexual intercourse for rape, it is defined as the physical union of genitalia or anus with the mouth, anus, or genitalia of another person. And that occurs upon penetration, however slight, and also includes oral sex as well. As far as consent, the age, when we're talking about juveniles, the age of consent in Delaware is 16. If the party is not 16, you cannot consent to someone more than 4 years older. If under 12, no consent at all. And the statute defines many other situations where adults are deemed unable to consent above the, just simple no or yes.
And Colleen, how prevalent is sexual assault in our society? Is there a particular demographic who are more likely to be a victim of sexual assault, and why?
So the statistics that I have come from rainn.org, and it says on average there are 433,648 victims of sexual assault, of rape and sexual assault in the US each year. What you see is younger people are at higher risk. A majority of sexual assault victims are under the age of 30. And women and girls experience sexual assault at higher rates. The statistic that I've read is 1 in every 6 woman has either been a victim of an attempted rape or sexual assault. But men and boys also experience sexual assault as well. 1 in 10 rape victims are male, and transgender college students are at a higher risk than non-transgender women and men of the same age group, college age group. However, really, sexual assault isn't a one-size-fits-all. Anyone can be a victim, and it can be difficult to really track those statistics because of the rate at which certain victims report versus not report, and things of that nature.
And Lisa, what are the signs of sexual assault?
Well, the signs of sexual assault differ from person to person. There are a lot. Mostly I would look for things that are out of the ordinary. There's not always a physical sign of sexual assault. However, I do recommend immediately going to the hospital if it happens, and you could be examined by a sexual assault nurse examiner so that they can give you the treatment that you need. And they can also preserve evidence if the case is going to be prosecuted later. Survivors can experience trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, There are neurobiological impacts to the brain and the nervous system, I'm sorry. During the time of assault, your brain may go into survival mode and the fight, flight, or freeze response kicks in. Trauma can cause memory loss or inconsistencies in your narrative. You can look for changes in hygiene, develop phobias where you didn't have them before, self-harm, suicidal, anxiety, unexplained anger, not only toward the perpetrator, but toward yourself and other people. A sudden drop in work performance or school performance, crying with no provocation, sleep disturbances. Some people go to substance abuse because it numbs the pain that they're experiencing. A low self-esteem, fear of people, depression. Blame is a big one, but it's always important to remember that sexual assault is never the victim's fault. Children have additional signs. They may be unwilling to participate in physical activities that they once enjoyed. Poor peer relationships, regress, have tantrums or wet the bed. Some children may abuse other children. If they're under 7 years of age and they are touching someone that is around the same age, that's actually normal. They're curious, and it's good to have a talk with them about boundaries and body parts. But the things to worry about that you should look for is if the child is tricking another child into touching genitals, or there's a 3-year age difference, or it's inappropriate, such as oral to genital, or if the child makes threats, or if it's repetitive and it's already been discussed with the child. In childhood, when they're abused, and if it goes untreated, it can manifest itself in many different ways in adulthood, such as an abnormal view of sex, or a problem with sexual functioning, self-destructive behavior, hypervigilance, a need for control, or they isolate themselves, or an emotional detachment. It's also important to know that there are many places out there that can help. There's trainings that you can go to, or they're online, or if you go to the BoBidenFoundation.org, have trainings where you can get tips on how to protect your children from child sexual abuse.
And how can survivors speak out?
Okay, well, they can report the crime. That's the first thing. In the state of Delaware, if the victim is a child, everyone is a mandatory reporter, and it must be done immediately. Although it's not mandatory to report sexual assault when the victim is an adult, I do recommend doing so. If you are not in a place mentally to do it yourself, you can always go with a victim's advocate or another support person. You do not need to report the crime if you seek medical help. So don't let that, if you're afraid to report it, don't let that stop you from seeking medical help. Or you could start therapy and begin the healing process, and they can help you get to a place where you're comfortable making this report. There's also the 24-hour Delaware Rape Crisis Hotline, which is 1-800-262-8900, or 24-hour Delaware Victim Center at 1-800-842-8461. And there's also the Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-292-9582.
Colleen, what is the Delaware Department of Justice doing to help victims of sexual assault?
There are many different things that the Department of Justice does to help victims of sexual assault. As far as prosecution of the cases, one of the things that the Department of Justice does is the deputy attorneys general, as well as social workers, get involved in the case in the early stages, pre-arrest and pre-charging. And really that allows us to make contact with the victim as early as possible, make sure that victims have resources that they need, which can be anything from counseling, the Victims Compensation Assistance Program, maybe home security if there's a security concern, many different other things. And I know Lisa's going to touch on some of that in a little bit. It really allows us to be in touch with the Chief Investigating Officer to make sure that we're aware of the evidence that's being collected, the interviews that are being done, and everything that is going through the case process. It allows us to talk to medical professionals who may have seen the victim, if the victim went to the hospital, and collaborate with them to make sure that the victim has the medical treatment that they need. And with juvenile cases, we are involved in what's called a multidisciplinary team, and that includes essentially everyone involved in the case, where we meet and discuss the case and how it's going. One of the things that I find to be very helpful with the Department of Justice getting involved early in the process and speaking to victims early in the process is it does allow Lisa and I and our other attorneys and social workers to really start to build a relationship with the victims as far as rapport and trust. It's something very difficult. Just reporting a sexual assault is very difficult for a victim. And so being able to start to build that relationship to make sure that the victim is comfortable with the process, explaining the entire process to somebody who may not have gone through it before or isn't familiar is very important and something that we take very seriously in our sexual assault cases, as well as other cases. Delaware does also have in its statutes what's called a Victim's Bill of Rights. And I just want to talk about some highlights of that Victim's Bill of Rights. One of the things in that Bill of Rights is that the Department of Justice will not release any sort of personal identifying information of victims once a case is pending, and we're giving that, any sort of information for the case. We won't release anything like that. The prosecutor will confer with the victim before amending a charge, dismissing a charge, agreeing to a plea. And again, that goes to the building communication with the victim early on. Is ideally when we discuss a plea with a victim or a charging decision, it's not our first time discussing this case with the victim, and we really are able to collaborate with what we think is an appropriate resolution of the case, as well as taking in mind what the victim wants out of the case, and really being able to have those discussions so that we're all on the same page. Victim safety is in the Victim's Bill of Rights, and that's really geared towards later in the process when the case has been charged and we're going to court. So under the Bill of Rights, we provide separate waiting areas for court when possible. If not possible, make sure that we provide additional safety measures so that the victim feels safe and comfortable coming to court. In Newcastle County, where Lisa and I work, we have an attorney general office or waiting room where within the courthouse, and it is a secure area. You need access to get in. And that's typically where, whenever victims need to come to court, we will make sure that they're in that safe area with Lisa or another social worker or anyone else involved in the case. We also, under the Victim's Bill of Rights, the victims are also to be provided information at their first contact from law enforcement about how to check custody status of a defendant. And that's also something that Lisa and I typically do with our victim meetings as well. Any procedures that the victim should follow if they're threatened by the suspect or anyone else, or the defendant, if they're intimidated, or if any conditions of bail are not complied with. we make sure that our victims are aware of what to do in any situation where they may feel unsafe or may feel threatened or intimidated. We also provide notice of hearings, court dates, convictions, sentencings, and then any results of any of that. And essentially, one of the biggest things that the Department of Justice wants to do, and I know Lisa and I in our cases, is just keep the victim informed of everything in the process. And sometimes that can be just letting the victim know that at this point, especially during the pandemic, maybe we don't have any trial dates or things like that, but letting them know and making sure that victims are comfortable that as soon as we have court dates and as soon as anything's going on, they're one of the first ones that we let know, so that we can make sure that the victim is prepared if they need to come into court for trial or for a victim impact statement at sentencing, and just make sure that the victim knows exactly where their case is, the case against the defendant is during the process.
Thank you. Lisa, what organizations can help survivors?
Well, most of the police departments in the state of Delaware and the Department of Justice have social workers and victims advocates that are assigned to each case. The social worker can accompany the survivor when they make the reports, when they're being questioned, and during different court hearings. We're there to offer support, find different resources that they need to get through the process. Colleen already stated that we explain the criminal justice process to victims. However, a lot of times I like to joke with the prosecutors that I'm more the interpreter because they speak legalese and I put it back in English for the non-lawyer people. Resources are still available to survivors, even if our department doesn't move forward with prosecution for whatever reason. The inability to prosecute a crime, it's important that the survivor know that it's not because they're not believed. We think they haven't been affected by the assault. And it doesn't mean that isn't any value in still reporting the crime. Also, sometimes we have survivors with cognitive disabilities, physical disabilities, or just simply a language barrier, and we work with different organizations to make sure that we can communicate effectively with all the people. There are a lot of therapists who specialize in sexual assault in Delaware. We give a lot of specific names to survivors, but you're not limited to who we recommend, because when you find a therapist, one you want to work with is a very personal choice. I wanted to mention psychologytoday.com. It's an excellent website. It has a comprehensive list of therapists in your area. Each listing provides you with important information about that specific therapist. Colleen already covered the Victims Compensation Assistance Program, and I believe we had a chat about that on Tuesday, so people can take a look at that. I wanted to mention SOAR, Survivors of Abuse and Recovery, and they can be reached at 655-3953. We refer a lot of victims to this practice because they work specifically with victims of sexual assault and abuse. In addition to individual and family therapy, they have teen groups, so a survivor can speak and listen to other teens who are going through the same thing, and this way they won't feel so alone. They also have parent groups, because when something happens to the child, the parent is a secondary victim, and a parent or guardian may need some support so that they can be a strong support for the child that was assaulted. The Sexual Assault Response Center at 1-800-773-8570 provides victims advocates to assist victims throughout the whole process. They provide therapists and support groups. We have a child advocacy center in all 3 counties in Delaware. It's a safe place for children to disclose what happened to them. The interviewers are well-trained child forensic interviewers. law enforcement or a prosecutor makes the referral for you to this center. Sometimes sexual assault can affect other aspects of your life, such as financing and housing. The Winter-Laird Porter State Service Center at 302-777-2800 provides emergency food, emergency housing, food stamps, and Medicaid. There's also a website known as DelawareVictimServices.org, and it provides different hotline numbers and multiple resources for survivors.
Thank you. Colleen, how would someone report a sexual assault?
The number one place to report sexual assault would be to call the police. And that can be either 911 or your local police non-emergency line if it's a later report or something like that. Obviously, in any emergency situation, a victim or survivor wants to call 911. Ideally, the sexual assault should be reported in the jurisdiction where it occurred. That's where that police agency will be the ones that will investigate the assault. However, if it is just reported to a local police agency and for example, in Newcastle County and it occurred in Kent County, the police agencies can assist and make sure that the report gets to the appropriate place. Other ways that sexual assaults are reported, as Lisa had mentioned, through the hospital. If someone does go to the hospital and reports a sexual assault and gets a SANE kit or a sexual assault exam, then the hospital will also notify the police and the police will get involved that way. Also, as Lisa said, with children, anyone in Delaware is a mandatory reporter. So if something with a juvenile is reported, that to someone, that should be reported to the police as well. And then if in school, whether juvenile or adult, if adult meeting in college or something like that, a report to the school, they should also notify the police, or they will, I'm thinking more in the college context. I believe they are still mandatory reporters, but will give resources in the proper way to notify. The police are really the ones that are investigating the sexual assault, although hospitals and the Department of Justice are important in the process. The police are the ones that get the report and do the investigations. So they're the number one place to contact.
Lisa, what should you do if a child discloses sexual assault?
You should stay calm and offer support. Your child may take their cues from you. If you overreact, they could shut down or think they're in trouble, and they don't want to make you upset. So you need to remember that. Let the child know you believe them. It's not their fault and they're not in trouble. False reports are rare. Thank them for telling you. That's really a big deal for them to disclose. A lot of adults have problems disclosing. Make sure to tell them how brave they are. Answer their questions honestly and calmly. Do not interview the child. That's very important. Let the police do the investigation and limit yourself to minimal questions such as who, when, why, and what. Report to the police. Remember, everyone in Delaware is a mandatory reporter. If the abuse just happened, take them to the emergency room in Newcastle County, preferably AI DuPont Children's Hospital. If it's a delayed disclosure, which is common, you can take them to their pediatrician. Write down their exact words for reporting. Don't use the word rape if the child didn't use that word. And just make the report. You do not need to decide if it actually happened or not. Let law enforcement decide that. Do not pressure the child. Do not correct the child's language. And sometimes this can be very difficult for parents and caregivers because the child may use a word that's shocking. You don't want to correct them because you don't want them to think that they said something wrong while they might think they're in trouble or they may shut down. Do not confront the suspect. Let law enforcement handle the investigation. Don't take photographs, don't have the child undress, and don't downplay the severity. And As I mentioned before, there are trainings out there that you can take a look at to help you better protect your children against child sexual assault.
And it is important for survivors to take care of themselves. Lisa, do you have any tips on how to do that?
Yes. Seek help and support. Don't go through this alone. Identify the people in your life that can validate your feelings, not judge you, and come up with questions such as, well, why did you do this or why did you do that? Talk about what happened to you in an environment that's safe and where you won't be judged, like seeing a therapist. Report what happened to you. There's support groups. Be gentle with yourself and remember it's never your fault. Use stress reduction techniques such as breathing and yoga. Avoid stimulants. Remember, it's okay to cry. Crying can be very cleansing. Discover your creative self. Give yourself timeouts. Write in a journal and release the feelings. And most importantly, remember, healing doesn't mean the damage never existed. It means the damage no longer controls your life.
It looks like we have a question from the audience. The question is, has the COVID-19 pandemic affected reporting of sexual assault crimes?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I'm not sure exactly what the statistic or information is about how it's affected reporting crimes, sexual assault crimes. I can say that throughout the pandemic, we have continued getting new reports, getting new cases. I think that the way the pandemic has affected, at least from the prosecution standpoint, is the delay in sometimes being able to, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, interview witnesses, complete the investigation, although a lot of that really has been amped up and we've been able to really catch up. But also the delay with the courts being closed and cases going to trial and getting court dates and stuff like that. Hopefully we're towards the end of that at this point. But as far as an effective reporting, I don't know the exact information on that, but I can say that we have continuously had new cases, new reports, and new investigations throughout the COVID-19 pandemic.
The thing that's really slowed down, though, are the court hearings. Basically, we haven't been able to go to trial, so we're about a year behind.
Looks like we have another question. What are some myths about sexual assault that we should dispel?
I could cover that one. Very few reports are false, especially if the report is coming from a child. It's very hard to make a disclosure. And young children are more likely to tell a lie to get out of trouble than to get someone into trouble. Some people believe that if you were sexually molested as a child, you're going to be a sexual predator, that you would never do it because it happened to you. You're no more likely to do it either way. And actually right now there's studies out there showing a precursor is actually being exposed to domestic violence. That violence and control is something that could be affected, can affect someone to commit sexual assault more so than having it happen to them themselves. Some people believe that you hear a lot about homosexuality and the LGBT community, and they think that say that they are child molesters, and this is completely false because sexual assault, pedophilia is more about an age. It isn't about a gender, and they are no more likely to commit a sexual assault than a cisgender person. There's just so many out there. Some people think that you shouldn't talk to children about this sort of thing, because a child should be a child and the world is scary and they shouldn't know. But the truth is, a child that's sexually abused doesn't get to be just a child. You have to find a way to explain it to them where you're not terrifying them. You're just making them aware. It's that whole fear versus aware thing. And there's many tips out there that can help you. I had a thought on my head about what I wanted to say. I guess that's it for now.
Thank you. It looks like there are no other questions at this time, but if at a later point, those who are watching a replay of the chat have a question, please submit them below and we will get back to you. Well, that concludes today's discussion on sexual assault crimes. I'd like to thank our panelists for taking time out of their day to provide resources and information to those who watched. Please remember that if you missed any of our Facebook live chats this week, they will still be up on our Facebook page or on our YouTube page at youtube.com/DelawareDOJ. Thank you for tuning in this week for our Facebook live chats. We hope the information we provided was helpful for individuals during National Crime Victims' Rights Week. Please stay safe and healthy.